Did he do it, right?
Yeah.
I know
He did it.
You've been heavy on social media talking about it.
And I'm the only one who's been vocal about this long before.
No one expected 50 Cent to walk into that courtroom, but when he did, everything collapsed. It wasn't just a dramatic twist in a high-profile trial. It was the spark that ignited a full-blown cultural earthquake. The moment he stepped through those doors, suited in black and silent as a shadow, the entire room shifted. Diddy's eyes locked on him instantly, and witnesses say the air itself got heavier, like history was about to happen. This wasn't just about Cassie's testimony anymore. It wasn't just about rumors whispered for years behind studio walls and velvet rope.
It's day one of the celebrity trial gripping much of the nation. Sean Diddy Combs, once one of entertainment's most powerful moguls, accused of crimes so heinous, he faces the possibility of spending the rest of his life behind bars.
This was about power, silence, and what happens when someone finally dares to break both. What followed wasn't a show, it wasn't entertainment, it was a calculated takedown, one that would send shockwaves through the music industry and force even the loudest voices to go quiet. By the time the day ended, courtroom sketches replaced PR headshots, hashtags replaced hit singles, and Diddy, the untouchable mogul, was unraveling in front of the world. In the next few minutes, you're going to hear exactly how it all went down.
The decision guarantees Combs will face trial beginning just 4 days from now that will test whether one of music's most prolific figures used his power, wealth, and fame to exploit both women and men for decades.
The moment Cassie's voice found backing, the moment celebrities stopped pretending not to see, and the exact second the industry's carefully guarded empire started to crumble. Because what happened on day 5 of that trial wasn't just a legal proceeding, it was the beginning of the end for one of the most powerful men in music. And it all started with 50 Cent sitting silently in the back of a courtroom watching the empire burn from the inside out. Day 5 was supposed to be just another tense but predictable chapter in the trial.
Diddy's lawyers had argued that he had made good faith efforts by showing up in New York ready to surrender to face these charges, but prosecutors said that he could not be trusted, that he has a history of trying to intimidate witnesses, including some who are going to be witnesses in this case.
A continuation of Cassie's emotional testimony and more cautious maneuvering from both legal teams. Reporters had taken their usual spots, the gallery filled with murmurs and anticipation, and Diddy arrived early, flanked by a legal entourage and extra security, his demeanor carefully rehearsed and measured. He sat with a forced calm, eyes down, jaw tight, trying to project the same control he had built his career on. But the energy in the room was different. Even before the judge entered, people could feel it, an unspoken tension crawling across the walls like static. It was as if the air itself knew something was about to erupt.
It was a family affair inside the courtroom. Diddy entered the court wearing a white shirt and a casual crew neck sweater. He faced his mom and his kids and placed his hand on his heart, made a symbol of the heart with his fingers, and blew them a kiss.
Cassie's attorneys shuffled their notes with quiet intensity while the prosecution whispered among themselves, eyes scanning the doors like they were expecting a ghost. The defense looked strained, trying to regain composure after a rough previous day of testimony that had already chipped away at Diddy's image. The court stenographer tapped softly at her machine, catching the rhythm of the room. But then, just as the judge prepared to begin, a small noise changed everything. The back doors of the courtroom creaked open, heads turned, conversation stopped mid-sentence, because it wasn't another lawyer or security officer walking in.
Everyone knew he was the devil. He's been the devil for 30 years. He's been covered and protected by not only Clive Davis, but Lucien Grange.
It was 50 Cent. Alone, sharp suit, dark glasses, no words, just presence. And in that instant, before he even sat down, everything about the day shifted. Reporters who had been bored 5 minutes earlier now leaned forward, eyes wide. Phones appeared under benches. Diddy didn't move for a full 3 seconds. Witnesses would later describe it as the moment a storm entered the room, and everyone could feel the pressure drop. He didn't enter quietly, he entered with purpose, like every step down the courtroom aisle was scripted to send a message.
Sean Diddy Combs' family leaving court. 6 children were in court today, seated in the second row along with his mom.
50 Cent wasn't hiding in a hoodie or ducking behind legal teams. He was front and center, tailored suit crisp, posture straight, walking like he owned the moment. And for a few minutes, he absolutely did. As he made his way to a seat near the back of the gallery, the room shifted again, like gravity itself was tilting in his direction. People sat up straighter, whispered reactions buzzed behind hands. Even the judge paused, catching his presence with a subtle nod, acknowledging him without breaking protocol.
Now, as far as jury selection goes, I think the biggest takeaway for me is that both sides expect to have all of this done in the matter of 3 days. Now, given just how high profile this trial is, I was kind of stunned that they seem very confident that they will be able to seat a jury in that amount of time.
Diddy saw him too immediately. Witnesses say his expression changed the moment their eyes met. His confidence wavered, and that tightly wound image he had clung to since day one cracked just for a second. His fingers fidgeted. One of his attorneys leaned in to speak, but Diddy didn't respond. His gaze was locked. 50 didn't speak. He didn't smile. He didn't need to. His silence was louder than any outburst. It said, "I'm not here for drama. I'm here for truth." For years, he'd taken shots at Diddy online. Through interviews, cryptic posts, subtle jab.
The Sean Diddy Combs trial has started, and I told you that I would give you an update when it's pertinent. So a lot of things have happened today, including they have chosen the 12 jurors that will decide Diddy's fate.
But this wasn't trolling, this was war. And the fact that he had chosen to show up in person during one of the most vulnerable days of the trial sent a message louder than any tweet. He was done watching from the sidelines. The prosecutors noticed too. They glanced at one another with curiosity and maybe a hint of strategy. The defense, on the other hand, looked like they'd seen the past walk in and demand answers. No announcement, no fanfare. Just one man walking into a room and shifting the entire narrative without saying a single word. When the lunch recess was finally called, the courtroom emptied in a controlled chaos of whispers, flashing cameras, and buzzing phones, all waiting for a moment that would become one of the most replayed clips of the year. 50 Cent didn't dodge the attention, he stepped right into it. Reporters crowded the courthouse steps, and when the questions came, he didn't hesitate. "I'm here because I've watched this industry protect the wrong people for too long," he said, his voice steady, calm, and deliberate. "Cassie's brave for doing what she's doing. She's not alone anymore. Not while I'm here." It wasn't a media stunt, and it didn't feel like a performance. It felt like an eruption of long-held frustration. He spoke about the things he'd seen, the moments that made him uncomfortable, the behavior that people laughed off, but he knew wasn't right. He talked about the power Diddy had in silencing people, how careers were threatened, how reputations were bought. Everybody knew something was off, he said, but nobody wanted to be the one to say it. Then, the real bombshell dropped. He revealed that he had been working with Cassie's legal team for weeks behind the scenes. He'd provided documentation, old photos, phone records, and even a signed statement from a former bodyguard who had seen what went on at Diddy's private parties. But that wasn't enough. He wasn't just helping the case, he was launching his own. "I'm funding an independent investigation," he declared. "I've hired private investigators, not for clout, not for clicks, because too many people have been hurt, and too many are still scared." The words hit like a hammer, not just in the press, but in the industry. Cassie's team quickly issued a statement thanking him for his courage. Diddy's lawyers scrambled, calling the appearance a distraction, but no one could ignore what had just happened. The silence had been broken, and once it was broken, there was no going back. The impact was instant and unstoppable. Within minutes of 50 Cent's courthouse statement hitting social media, the internet erupted. Clips of him standing outside the courthouse, calmly delivering his message, were everywhere. TikTok, Instagram, X, YouTube. In less than 12 hours, over 60 million people had seen his words, and more importantly, felt them. But it wasn't just fans reacting, it was celebrities, executives, artists, and collaborators who had once stood shoulder to shoulder with Diddy. One by one, the silence began to fracture. Usher, once a protege of Diddy, quietly unfollowed him on Instagram. Mary J. Blige, a longtime collaborator, scrubbed every photo of them together from her page. Justin Bieber deleted posts praising Diddy and posted a cryptic story. Sometimes we learn too late who people really are. It was subtle, but it was seismic. Then Cardi Cardi B posted simply, "Protect women, no matter how powerful the man is." Even Drake joined the digital momentum, liking a tweet that read, "Real ones speak up, cowards stay quiet." But the most unexpected blow came from an anonymous music producer, someone who had stayed in the shadows for over a decade. "I worked on 3 of Diddy's projects, they wrote on X. I saw things I kept quiet about, not anymore." That one post racked up hundreds of thousands of likes in hours. And behind the scenes, Diddy's world was beginning to unravel. Executives at Revolt, his own media company, were reportedly holding emergency meetings. 2 major sponsors canceled upcoming partnerships within the same day. One Revolt employee anonymously told a reporter, "People are jumping ship. No one wants to be the last one standing next to him when this all comes down." The illusion of protection, of legacy, of untouchability, it was breaking. And it wasn't the lawsuit that did it. It was the moment one man refused to look away, and the world finally followed his lead. When Cassie stepped back into the courtroom after the break, something was different, noticeable, undeniable. She walked taller, her movements more deliberate, her eyes steadier. This wasn't the same woman who had taken the stand days earlier, carefully recounting trauma in a voice just above a whisper. This time, she looked like someone who finally knew she was being heard, and it wasn't just the observers who noticed. Even the jury seemed to sit straighter, more attentive. Cassie took her seat, adjusted the microphone, and looked directly at the panel before speaking. Her voice still carried calm, but now there was a weight behind every word, a quiet fury forged in years of silence. She didn't waste time on introductions or apologies. She spoke of moments too painful to revisit before. A 2017 trip to the Hamptons, where she claimed she was locked in a guest house for 2 days after texting a fellow artist. "He said I embarrassed him in front of the industry," she stated. "He told me I was his property." The defense objected. The judge overruled. Her words landed like stones, steady and deliberate. She then described what she called the unwritten rules of Diddy's world, who she could speak to, where she had to stand at parties, when she was allowed to leave a room. She explained how love was replaced with control, and how control became confinement. Then she did something that froze the room. She turned slightly toward the gallery and said, "I know some of you in here have seen what he's done, and I hope you say something too." Witnesses reported hearing someone breathe sharply in the back. It was Diddy. His face, once stone, now showed flashes of disbelief and barely restrained anger. One of his attorneys placed a hand on his shoulder. He didn't move, but one person did. 50 Cent, seated silently in the back, nodded once. Cassie saw it. Everyone did. And that nod said more than words ever could. "You're not standing alone anymore." As Cassie continued her testimony, she reached for something her team had prepared carefully, a small device that would play a piece of audio no one outside her circle had ever heard. With the judge's permission, the recording began to play through the courtroom speakers, and what came next left the entire room in stunned silence. It was Diddy's voice, unmistakable and unedited, shouting, "Don't test me, Cass. You know what happens when you push me." The sound was raw, threatening, and terrifying in its clarity. The courtroom, which had held its breath before, now seemed to stop breathing entirely. Reporters paused mid-scribble. Even the court sketch artist stopped drawing. Diddy's face turned ghostly pale. One of his lawyers leaned in to speak, but he didn't respond. His eyes were locked on the speaker like it had betrayed him personally. According to Cassie's team, the audio had been pulled from an old cloud-synced iPad she had forgotten existed until just weeks earlier. The defense tried to object again, but it was too late. The damage wasn't just done, it was permanent, and the jury felt it. Several members leaned in, visibly affected. One juror shook their head slowly, another gripped their notepad tighter, but the silence didn't last long. As Cassie began recounting more of the control architecture that defined her time with Diddy, her travel restricted, her calendar micromanaged, her personal freedom non-existent, something inside Diddy snapped, as she described a 2018 incident in Miami, where she was allegedly locked in a private room for more than a day. Diddy began muttering, then shaking his head, then bouncing his leg. Suddenly, he slammed his open palm on the table and shouted, "That's not what happened." The courtroom erupted. The sound echoed like a freezing everyone. The judge didn't flinch. She raised her gavel and said coldly, "Mr. Combs, this is your only warning. One more outburst and you will be removed." But Diddy wasn't looking at her. He was staring straight past the stand, past the prosecution, locking eyes with 50 Cent. "You," he growled. "You've been waiting for this, haven't you? You'll regret it." Security moved in immediately, surrounding Diddy's seat. 50 didn't flinch. He leaned back slowly in his chair, crossed one leg over the other, and stared. He didn't need to respond. His silence said everything. Cassie, unshaken, continued speaking like the explosion hadn't just happened. And for the first time, the entire courtroom saw what power looked like when it lost its grip. The fallout from Diddy's outburst didn't wait for the next court session. It began immediately and visibly inside the courtroom and beyond its walls. As the afternoon wore on, the transformation in Diddy's demeanor was undeniable. This wasn't the poised mogul who once strutted into court flanked by a confident legal team. This was a man unraveling in real time. He stopped taking notes, stopped whispering with his attorneys. At one point, he sat with his head in his hands, motionless. Court sketch artists captured every moment, the clenched jaw, the hollow stare, the fingers digging into the table. Meanwhile, Cassie remained composed, her voice steady as she revealed more about what she described as systemic control, the routines, the surveillance, the emotional isolation. Jurors who had remained passive through earlier testimonies were now visibly affected. One middle-aged juror who had barely reacted until that day was leaning forward, eyes sharp, taking furious notes. Another, previously unfocused, was locked in with unwavering attention. And outside the courtroom, the headlines exploded. Diddy melts down in courtroom as 50 Cent watches became a trending headline within minutes. Footage of his outburst, paired with 50 Cent's silent reaction, went viral before court had even adjourned. News outlets dissected every detail, from Diddy's expression to the judge's ice-cold warning. But the real collapse wasn't just Diddy's courtroom presence, it was his public image, which had been meticulously crafted over decades as calm, calculated, and in control. That image shattered the moment he screamed across a courtroom packed with reporters, jurors, and a global audience watching from their phones. And while Diddy fell silent, 50 Cent didn't have to say a word. He stayed exactly where he was, arms folded, eyes steady, because at that point he didn't need to fight. The damage had been done, not by a song, not by a diss, but by truth, silence, and the unraveling of a man who once believed he was untouchable. As the trial's momentum shifted inside the courtroom, the impact outside the courthouse surged like a tidal wave, crashing directly into the walls of the music industry. What had once been whispered in green rooms and private jets was now being blasted across every platform imaginable. Diddy's empire, built on reputation, relationships, and relentless image control, was beginning to crack, and the industry was suddenly deciding where to stand. Celebrities who had once aligned themselves with Diddy, whether for clout or contracts, began to distance themselves at record speed. His name, once synonymous with success, was now radioactive. Publicists scrambled, PR teams went silent. Usher's quiet unfollow was just the beginning. Artists began scrubbing their timelines, removing traces of their connections. Mary J. Blige's deletion of every photo with Diddy was a statement louder than any press release. But then came the chain reaction. Justin Bieber, visibly shaken by the public shift, not only removed Diddy-related posts, but shared a chillingly vague Instagram story. Sometimes we learn too late who people really are. Within hours, dozens of other artists followed suit. Cardi B's post, "Protect women, no matter how powerful the man is," was shared by millions. Viola Davis and Gabrielle Union added their voices, posting support for Cassie, but the most damning blow came from inside the industry itself. An anonymous music producer, long silent, posted, "I worked on 3 of Diddy's projects. I saw things I kept quiet about. Not anymore." That post alone reached over 300,000 likes within a single day. Behind the scenes, Diddy's media company Revolt was in panic mode. Emergency meetings were called, advertisers began pulling out. At least 2 major sponsors canceled upcoming events, sending shockwaves through the business side of Diddy's empire. One Revolt employee told a journalist anonymously, "People are jumping ship. No one wants to be the last one standing next to him when this all comes down." And through it all, 50 Cent just kept posting, but not with rage. His posts were quiet, strategic, and cutting. A backstage photo of him with Cassie, captioned, "You always deserved better." Another post read, "Day 5. It starts here." No rants, no threats, just precision. He wasn't just dismantling Diddy's defense. He was pulling the thread on an entire industry silence. While the courtroom braced for each new revelation and the internet continued to digest the avalanche of reactions, 50 Cent stayed exactly where he'd started, silent, steady, and unshakable. He didn't need to say more. The world was already watching. As Diddy unraveled, 50 grew more composed, like he'd been waiting for this moment not for days, but for years. And the truth is, he had. For over a decade, he had dropped warnings in interviews, posted cryptic captions, and hinted that there was more behind Diddy's success than the public wanted to admit. But now, those old clips were resurfacing with chilling clarity. A 2009 interview clip went viral, 50 looking dead at the camera saying, "There's things about Puff that just don't sit right with me. That man got secrets." Back then, it had sounded like petty rap beef. Now it sounded like prophecy. In the courtroom, Diddy's legal team tried desperately to regroup. Court insiders said they held emergency strategy meetings until 4 a.m., debating whether to maintain a hard denial or pivot toward an emotional defense, painting Diddy as a flawed man, a victim of his environment. But the shift was too little, too late. The jury had seen his outburst. They'd heard his voice on the recording. They'd watched Cassie speak with unshakable clarity while 50 Cent sat behind her like a monument of support. And that presence, that mattered. One juror, previously passive, now took constant notes. Another, who had looked distracted earlier in the trial, was fully locked in. Courtroom observers noted how Cassie seemed to draw strength from knowing she wasn't alone. 50's silence became her armor. It wasn't about him stealing the spotlight, it was about lending it to someone who had once been voiceless. And while Diddy's team scrambled to control the narrative had already slipped through their fingers. This wasn't just a trial anymore, it was a reckoning, one that made it clear. The power dynamics in the industry were changing, and 50 Cent wasn't just watching them fall, he was helping push them over the edge, one silent, devastating move at a time. Diddy's empire didn't fall in one day, but on day 5 of that courtroom trial, the foundation cracked loud enough for the world to hear. What started as one woman's painful testimony transformed into something far larger, a reckoning with power, control, and silence that had gripped the music industry for decades. Cassie, once dismissed as just another voice in the noise, stood at the center of the storm with a clarity and strength that could no longer be ignored. But what changed everything wasn't just her courage, it was the presence of someone powerful enough to shift the weight of public opinion. 50 Cent didn't show up for drama, or headlines, or a viral moment. He showed up because truth finally demanded a platform. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't grandstand, he just watched. And in watching, he made the world look where it had refused to look for years. By the end of that day, Diddy had exploded in open court, his silence shattered and his image in ruins. The industry, once complicit in its own denial, started to fracture. Collaborators walked away, sponsors disappeared, and whispers turned into confessions. It wasn't just about Cassie versus Diddy anymore. It was about an empire versus the truth. And when the illusion shattered, the question wasn't whether Diddy would survive, it was how many others would fall next. Because if day 5 taught us anything, it's that power protects itself only as long as silence allows. And once someone speaks, someone big enough, brave enough, and bold enough, everything changes. 50 Cent didn't just attend a trial, he lit the match that started a fire, and now the entire industry is left to deal with the smoke. What happens next? That's the part nobody saw coming, but one thing's for sure, business as usual is over.